Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to pick up the argument between the SNP and the Conservatives on who should qualify for a vote in the now inevitable Scottish independence referendum. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So yesterday, the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, attacked a piece in a right-wing Scottish newspaper with the headline, "Plan to give all UK Scots vote in next referendum." Now, she made 2 points, the first of which was that they were basically conceding that there would have to be a referendum by even discussing such a policy. Absolutely, it's inevitable now, let us be honest. And secondly, that she sees it as trying to rig the rules. Now, that last point is of interest. I don't know whether allowing Scots outside of the current Scottish residency would be more or less likely to yield a positive result for the independence campaign, though I can guess. It makes more sense that Scots living in another part of the UK would be less likely to support independence. Also because pro-unionists want this change and those in favour of independence want the previous system. I mean, that's also a little bit of a hint as to what they think. For full disclosure, for those who don't know already, I am in favour of union. I would be very sad to see my country break up and to lose my second lifelong citizenship in the space of a few years. I will also say that my personal view on the matter of the referendum is that a system had already been designed. We had a referendum on the same subject in 2014. Yes, it was under different circumstances, as one of the main Remain arguments was to remain part of one of the big players in the EU. I mean, that's why I'm in full support of another referendum, despite the fact that I'd like Remain to win again. A major promise made at the time has been broken. And I mean broken. There were some on the Remain side who meant it, but there were those in the Conservative Party who made that promise and then delivered Brexit into us. They broke their promise. But it makes no difference whether it was a broken promise or not. It was a major selling point of Remain in the UK that is no longer the case. I will also say, because a system was agreed by both the Scottish and Westminster Parliaments, and that those parliaments are not hugely different to now, I don't see any reason why there should be a change in that agreement. At the end of the day, it was a Scottish Parliament with an SNP government, and it was a Westminster Parliament with a Conservative government. That's what it is now. And they agreed that, who should have a vote at the last time. There is now precedent. If it were happening half a century later or something, absolutely have another debate. But the referendum is likely to take place within 10 years of the last one. What's the justification for changing it? That being said, I'm all for a hypothetical discussion about the merits and demerits of it, because there are problems. Now, in defending the idea of basing the vote entirely on residency, people have drawn comparisons with, say, general elections or local referenda. But they are not valid comparisons. In a general election, you are voting for a government who will decide on matters in their area of influence, doesn't affect you if you're outside that area of influence, and it's for a limited amount of time. So if you're a Scot living in Yorkshire, then not only do you show excellent taste, but there's no need to vote in a Holyrood election, because it won't affect you unless you move back. But if you did move back at the next election, you would get a vote. But let's consider a Scot living in Yorkshire during this time of an independence referendum. Now, let's say Leave won. Consider the impact on that Scot. Their citizenship is going to change, and they had no say in the matter. Now, I feel bad enough that my citizenship was taken from me, not just by a majority. That would be upsetting, but you get over it. But based on lies. That if the truth had been known, people wouldn't have voted for it. So I know that it was a scam. But I at least got to have a say. Secondly, it would potentially affect their residency rights and the right to work and move around. Now, I would like to think that the Remains of the UK would grant full citizenship to anyone living in England or Wales at the time. Like maybe even an agreement between what's left of, I don't even know what we'd call it, But Westminster and Holyrood agreed some system where we could have something very much like we do between Britain and Ireland, where people could still move around. Doesn't matter what their citizenship is, they could still move around as if the UK was still whole. I would like to think that that would be the case. But I don't know that that would be the case. There would be no legal guarantee of it. Look at how badly EU citizens living in the UK have been treated since Brexit. Now, it could be a very different mentality with Scottish residents, but there's no legal guarantee of it. So it would be uncertain for that person. And again, they had no say. As a result of a vote they were not permitted to take part in, their citizenship, freedom of movement, rights to live and work has been thrown into chaos. Now, where have we heard that before? Frankly, anyone who thought it was wrong that UK citizens living in the EU were not allowed to vote in the Brexit referendum, as many were not, can't really agree that it is right that Scots living in Wales should not get a vote on this one. But there are other examples. So let's say you have someone who was born, raised and lived in Glasgow for 40 years. At the age of 40, never been outside of Glasgow, they moved to Yorkshire just before the pandemic. I'm going to keep using Yorkshire as my example because frankly, where else would they sensibly move to? So they don't get a vote. They may only have moved for a job. It might have only been short term. They might be moving back in a year or two. Who knows? Doesn't matter. They don't get a vote. But then the reverse position. Someone born and raised in Barnsley, they get a short-term contract working on a job in Scotland somewhere. They're just there for a couple of years. Then they'll be moving back. But they're resident in Scotland at the time of the referendum, so they do get a vote. How is that juxtaposition right? Now, at this point, it would seem that it's only fair that any Scots, at least living in the UK, maybe further afield, but that's a different argument, should perhaps have a vote in the referendum. But it isn't actually as simple as that. Because if it were, then my position would be simply this. Look, a system was decided, so we have precedence, but it was a load of crap. But there are aberrations if you adopt a different system. It's not actually simple. Like, I can't imagine anyone saying that someone who'd lived in Scotland for decades but moved out for a year shouldn't get a vote. But how do you then determine which Outlander Scots should get a vote and which shouldn't? Like, people have pointed to Ian Duncan Smith. I totally agree with this point. He was born in Scotland, but you wouldn't call him Scottish. He grew up in the Midlands of England. He was literally born in a Scottish hospital and then gone. Then there's Gordon Ramsay. He even refers to himself as Scottish with his Oxfordshire accent. But he sort of is. He was born and spent the first 5 years of his life in Scotland. But then he moved to England, quite far into England, where he did most of his growing up. But it could be argued he knows more about France than Scotland. And that's another reason for me saying that a system was agreed in 2014 and should remain in place. Like, I quizzed someone on Twitter about how they thought there was justification for asking for the system to be changed when a system has already been agreed. And they just responded, because it was wrong in 2014. Okay, I mean, I think it's wrong as well. But if it were an easy wrong to put right, I would be arguing as they are as well. I'd absolutely be making that argument. Wouldn't make any difference, because for all Sturgeon's talk of rigging the system, she's doing the same herself. That's not a criticism, that's politics. Frankly, the situation is this simple. One system favours one side and another system favours the other side. It's really that simple. You know, people are of the belief if all Scots throughout the UK got a vote, as well as everyone resident in Scotland got a vote, it's more likely, I don't know where it would fall, but it's more likely Remain would win. But if it's only those resident in Scotland, it's more likely, again, not certain, more likely Leave would win. It's really that simple. Any campaign team that doesn't push for the system that gets them the result they want would be useless and actually should leave politics immediately because you're letting your own side down. But I'd still argue against it if I had a credible alternative. The problem is that you can point out how a system is unfair. That's actually quite easy. And I think it's deeply unfair for Scots in England or Wales, for example. I'm leaving Northern Ireland out of it purposely because I don't know what's going on with Northern Ireland at the same time. Let's leave that one aside. But I think it's deeply unfair for Scots in England or Wales to be excluded from a process that will affect the rest of their lives. It's not a general election that ushers in a government that can be ushered out at the next election. You know, there is a possible result that creates a permanence, something that will never be reversed later. Unfair. The Englishman living in Glasgow gets a vote, but the Scotsman living in Leeds doesn't. But it's also difficult for me to come up with an elegant definition of the sort of person living outside Scotland who should be able to decide. Like, I don't agree that being born in a Scottish hospital but being raised and living entirely in England should give you that right. Of course it shouldn't. I don't even agree that moving at the age of 5 and never returning for more than the odd visit should give you the right. Intuitively, I feel that anyone who grew up entirely in Scotland is Scottish. That's how I feel intuitively. It doesn't matter about parentage, it doesn't matter about where you're born. Where did you grow up? Where were you raised? Because inevitably that's what you culturally are. But that's intuitive. Even that has problems. How do you sensibly decide that that should be the case or make it the legal case? What if someone sort of did? You know, they spent a year in England. Maybe a parent moved for a year for a secondment or something. They still sort of grew up in Scotland, but they had that 1 year out, all sorts of things. It's really messy. It's very messy. But it is a really interesting debate if people avoid being defensive based on what they see as the best system for the result they want. But those are my thoughts anyway. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.